I'd love for the panel to just do a quick intro. We've got folks from a variety of different categories: CPG, financial services, direct-to-consumer, apparel. It's really going to give some terrific perspective from across all the different places and spaces where people are buying product. Let's dive in and just kind of quick intro. And is there something that you're seeing happening in the space that you just find hugely interesting and impactful?
Hi, everybody. I'm Damon Berger. It's nice to see you guys over there. How you guys doing on the side? Good to see you. Excited to be here. I represent our brands at Gap Inc., which are our namesake Gap, Banana Republic, Old Navy, and Athleta. In terms of what I've seen that I like, actually, we are finding ourselves to be strange competitors, Ben's company and I, because we are both shortlisted for the Lions for use of excellence in use of creators. And I was going to say, Ben's company, Dr. Pepper, did a phenomenal job of listening to the culture and farming it for the Dr. Pepper jingle. That if you're a TikTok junkie like me, that you saw this woman who just uploaded this jingle for Dr. Pepper, and Dr. Pepper did a great job of turning that into a commercial campaign. And I thought that was just a really, really well done way of thinking about how to, look at culture and then respond to it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Lane with MassMutual. So happy to be here today on stage with this great panel. Sports, to me, is an opportunity for a brand like ours. It gives us permission to be in people's lives. And without storefronts, it's become a really important part of our strategy for how we communicate with audiences.
Great. Hi, everyone. Dave Kersey, Global Head of Media at SharkNinja. For those who knows what SharkNinja is, raise your hand. Oh my God, this is great. Go to .com, buy a chill pill. So we are a product innovation company. We are in 39 product categories, anywhere from the kitchen, the bathroom, the house, the outdoors. And because of that, we have a number of different audience segments. So relevance, cultural imperatives are super critical for us, but it all means something different depending on that audience, that need state. We're a performance company at heart. So while we're not competing with these guys for a Cannes Lion, we're winning on the shelf and there is no competition. Is that good? But yeah, we'll talk more about that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Sylvan. I lead connected media for Keurig Dr. Pepper. I appreciate the kind words. I was going to say that's my favorite cultural moment as well for the past year. But another one that I've really loved is I have a son who plays AAU basketball. And if you go to any gym across the U.S., you will see the Sabrina Ionescu shoes are the most popular shoes that boys wear. And I think that Nike has done just a phenomenal job boosting women's sports with athletes like Sabrina announcing last week, Caitlin Clark has her own signature shoe. Asia Wilson is one of the top selling shoes. And I think the way that they've elevated women's sports, they've made them mainstream. They've made them so that little boys care. My son's not little, but that they care about women's sports, I think is a great example of changing the culture and really listening to how women's sports was growing in sort of small pockets and figuring out how they can blow it up and really ride that wave. So I think it's really inspiring to see 13-year-old boys wearing Sabrina shoes in every court in the U.S. I think it's a great example of cultural marketing. So.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna talk a little bit more about a number of the things that you guys referenced as we go through the questions. But I want to start with, I've been doing this for a long time. I've got gray hair, and back in the day when you were talking about reach or culture, it was a really blunt instrument, right? We would buy reach on television or reach in print, and culture was really whatever was being programmed to us by the big networks. That world has flipped on its head, and I'd love for you guys to just all talk about that in our prep. Three things that I'm going to lead you a little bit. There were three things that you talked about. You talked about understanding audience subsegments. You talked about the need to be purposeful, and you talked about multi-channel amplification. So I'd love, if you can talk about how those three things are being leveraged in your pursuit of reaching people and engaging them. Also, let's start with Dave. Or Ben, whoever wants to.
Sorry. Struggling to
can't
hear
hear
here. I think I heard the question. If I didn't, and I'm like just being a politician and I'm answering something different, I apologize. But I think for me, it really is about listening to your fans, listening to the culture. I think too many brands try to create culture out of thin air, and that's when it falls flat, right? I think with like the Romeo example that you had mentioned, Dr. Pepper has a great group of what we call raving fans, people who love the brand, people who talk about our brand, and we spend a lot of time celebrating them, right? We want to fan with our fans, is what we say. And with Romeo, it became a movement before we decided to do anything with it. It was actually on Christmas Eve when they released the video and the jingle. And I remember waking up on Christmas for some text from my team. I was in Mexico and maybe a little hungover, and they told me about this video that like our fans were really liking, and everybody who works for the Dr. Pepper brand is a huge fan of the brand themselves, and they love the jingle. Like they couldn't get it out of their ears, and then I couldn't the rest of the holiday. But throughout the course of between Christmas and New Year's, when people don't want to be working, we monitored fan reaction, and people just were dying for this jingle, and they couldn't get enough. And by the time we got back, people had created their own derivative works from it. They created Dr. Pepper commercials with the jingle, and there was just tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, impressions that were going toward it. And we realized that, like, as fans of Dr. Pepper, as fans of this jingle and of Romeo, we had to do something with Romeo. But it felt like we were trying to catch like an avalanche because it was moving so fast. And so it's really about listening to how important it is to your fans and then reacting appropriately. So we spent a lot of time coming up with ideas. None of them felt big enough given the response of the community. And we ultimately decided that we were going to turn essentially our biggest day of the year, the College Football National Championship, into a day where we celebrate Romeo, we celebrate our fans, and we tell them, hey, we hear you, we agree with you. This is a moment for our brand that's really important. So within a week, we created an entirely new spot for the national championship with Romeo's jingle at the center. And we ran it, and we broke the internet. Like it was really touching. I mean, working at CPG, often, very, very rarely do you have a moment that kind of makes you tear up. But the way people responded to Romeo's time in the spotlight was so touching. Like people were like, you guys really listened. You gave this creator a moment that she'll never forget. And there was like hashtags like Black Excellence and like all these amazing things like it really touched our fans. And it was truly like an amazing moment. So, but did that answer your question, or was I way off?
You did. And I'll talk louder. Dave.
I can hear you now.
You can? Okay.
So for us, we're a social first brand. That's our way in. We have a very large list of influencers, creators that really represent our brand across all of the individual categories, subcategories we're in. And that's how we really learn about our audiences and what they want, what matters to them. They actually give us a lot of insight on our products. So we'll change product innovation based on what our consumers are saying. So if we've launched something like this fan and they like it, they don't like a certain thing, we'll do an iteration based on all of the feedback we're getting. So listening to the fans is so critical for us. But it starts with the cultural narrative and making sure you have these influencers and creators that are authentic to their voice, their brand, and really resonating with audiences. I'll give two examples of that, because while you can't create culture, like you can't drive that necessarily, you can engineer virality. So as long as you have the right moment, the right time, you capture that, you can amplify that to a really large impact. So an example, Sabalenka, she was in the French Open finals. Anyone know what I'm talking about? It was the first heat wave. We were living the second one. She had a chill pill, did some content. There's a cryo thing you can put on this, put it on her skin. It blew up. And I immediately amplified that content across Europe, and we were sold out within days. So like being part of that moment with her, and then knowing how important that was because we were connected to the France Open, and scaling that to a larger degree. One other quick example, Creamy, it's our ice cream machine. I hope you all have one. We learned through some of our social listening that there was a guy making chicken smoothies. Chicken smoothies sounds really gross, but what it unlocked was a whole new audience segment around protein ice cream, protein treats. And now it's a huge line of our business. So really being in that moment culturally and then amplifying all of the insights is critical to our business.
We're gonna have them join our insights team and our innovation team.
Yeah.
But what,
Protein, Dr.
Kristin, before we go to you, 1 second, what it sounds to me, and I'm curious if this carries through with Damon and you, Kristin, is that in today's world, you're listening from the bottom up. You're listening to the customer, you're listening to what's happening out in the market, and you're identifying things that you can build off of as opposed to trying to dictate from the top down.
Well, I think it's that either you're a part of culture,
Yep.
or you're buying into culture, and I think that's a big difference between the best brands that we all know and love, and the best campaigns that we've seen, and the ability for brands to be successful is whether or not you are actually a part of the cultures you're trying to drive. And I think that's, when we look at something like what we did with Cat's Eye, with our Gap brand back in the summer of last year, this was something where we're listening to the culture. We know Cat's Eye is becoming, through the Dream Academy, something that everybody is starting to pay attention to. And as we think about that and what our brand Gap is it's about bridging the generational gap. You take something like Cat's Eye, which is of the culture, and then you take something like Milkshake by Khalees that you all now have in your head, and you combine those things, you have alchemy that is now a new part of the dialogue within that culture. And I think it's either you are buying that attention or earning that attention by being a part of that cultural layer.
Now, Kristin, I know you're itching. I know where you're going to go. So go there. Tell us about it.
So I was going to say, for MassMutual, we're not a brand that people wake up and think about or experience daily, weekly. It could be an annual meeting that you have with a financial planner. So sports, as I said before, gives a brand like ours permission to be in people's lives. And then we think of that as an invitation. And then it's more than just showing up there or buying into it. It's how do you show up with relevancy? How do you give fans something to want from you and expect from you? We've been NHL partners now. We're in our 9th year of the partnership. And nothing makes me happier when I go to pick my son up at school and some of the dads that are also there say, hey, when's your new work coming out? Like, love No Goals, love this spot, love Juice, and when are you coming out with your next wave of communications? And to me, that says that we have spoken to the audience in a way that we actually, they're open to us emotionally, we're leaned in, we're relevant, and we've set a high bar in terms of what they expect from us as a sponsor.
So you're not just drafting off the size of the league, you're creating around it as well.
That's
and
right.
Taking advantage of, unique audiences or unique types of choices that fans are making about how they want to engage with the product.
That's right.
Not your product, but the NHL.
And there's so many nice parallels between what it takes to have a successful financial plan and sport. It's strategy, it's teamwork between you and your advisor. It's holding one another accountable to outcomes. And so it's very easy for us to come up with storylines that naturally connect these topics. And then the athletes become the lens through which we tell them. So
I am going to throw a bit of a zinger because we didn't cover this in the prep call, but it just popped into my head, which is, it's easy, don't worry.
Okay. For you.
So the ground up, from the ground up, and you're working with influencers or creators or people who, are just creating content and didn't even intend to be part of an ad campaign. I would think it's much easier to work with those types of folks than with a league like the NHL. The leagues have very definitive structure around how they allow their marketing partners and their sponsors to wrap themselves into their experiences. Do any of you want to talk about like the difference between kind of working with an established large league to accomplish this type of thing versus someone who just kind of came up through the ether?
Yeah, we're leveraging both, really. We have our celebrity ambassadors, Tom Brady, Heidi Klum, and they're intentional. They fit a need, but it's more of that produced, polished content. There's a lot of parameters in what we can and can't do, but when we want to get our message out and really be part of culture and put new content in on a very rapid pace, we work with influencers. I think the big difference from where I'm sitting is a little bit of the trust, right? Because when you have these bigger opportunities, whether it's league sponsorships or whatnot, there are parameters you have to work within. When you really give permission to influencers to talk about your brand or creators to talk about your brand, even the rise of affiliates, which now they're financially motivated, you have to have a little bit of a risk tolerance because you don't know what's going to happen. But there are some safeguards you can put in, but that's really what I see as the bigger difference. But I think from an immediacy and a speed to new messaging, you have to go in at that bottom level.
I mean, I would push back. I don't think it's necessarily easier to work with from like bottoms up. I think it's just you have to approach them in different ways, right? It sounds obvious, but it's about authenticity, right? On a bottoms up, when people are talking about your brands, there's natural authenticity that comes there, but you can be just as authentic working with a professional athlete or professional sports team or an entertainer. We do a lot of sponsorships with like the New York Knicks, with Snapple, right? Snapple is endemic to New York City. Jalen Brunson, like unprompted by us, talked about Snapple on a TikTok and Instagram interview about 2 months ago, right? Like, and so like, you know, if you have products that appeal to your, you know, to the people you're working with, that's sort of the key, right? You don't want to find a partnership with somebody who would never consume your product if it wasn't for them getting paid. But as long as you find that there's a common ground and there's a narrative that they can tell that's authentic to who you are, they can create just as great a content. I think it's when you start doing logo slaps is when it starts to become noticeable by fans. And that's when it's kind of not a great use of money. So, you know, you find on the bottoms up, you find the creators who are talking about you through social listening. But from a top down perspective, you just do it by talking to agents, talking to like celebrities, and you start to find pockets of fandom. And if you work with them, then it becomes just as authentic and just as organic.
Anyone else want to add something, or should I move on to the next?
I have to say, working with the league has been, first of all, I've never worked with the NFL. I've worked with the NHL for a long time. They are fantastic partners to us. And one of the most important parts of that component of our relationship is the relationship we have with the Players Association, right? And they know the guys so well that when we need talent, it's a really easy get.
Great. Damon, I'm going to shoot this next one to you, which is we're talking about a lot of really interesting ways to engage. At the end of the day, this all has to work for the brand. It has to drive the business. Can you give us a sense of how do you measure success in this new world? It's not just about how many GRPs did I run, what reach did I deliver, it's what's the CPM. There's got to be a different way that you're thinking about measuring success. What can you talk a little bit about that?
Is this where we talk about ROAS, or do we talk about ROAS later?
We can talk about ROAS now.
So I think there's like this big myth going around that your short-term performance is somehow different from your long-term performance. And I think this idea that we're all, as marketers, you know, our best friends aren't our CEOs, they're our CFOs. And the idea that we have to really start to educate our internal teams, our agencies, that you can't get short-term performance, you can't get business results if you aren't investing in the brand at every turn. And so for me and for us, part of the turnaround that we've been very well publicized under that is so important to us is that we are trying to reach into the DNA of our brands, of what you all probably know. How many of you have bought something from one of our brands before? Are you paying attention? Okay. A lot of hands up. I think that what's amazing is that you all have an emotional connection to our brand. So it's on us to figure out what that connection is and to amplify that. And by doing so, that we will get those short-term metrics. So as you think about things like brand love or relevance scores or consideration scores, those are just as important to us as the CPMs and CPAs, the ROAS. Like, it has to be a kind of an all and not an either or for us. Obviously, if we're in promo or we're in short term and we're trying to drive for the quarter, there are going to be times where you skew one way or the other. But I think that to us, it's about building brands that last in culture and connect to and drive culture.
Kristin, I'm going to go to you last on this one because you have a different type of challenge. But Ben and Dave, I'd love to, you talked a lot about how you think about engagement and the success metrics with regards to this type of work. Can you give us a sense of how you?
Yeah, so for us, we're at the heart a performance company. So we start at the ground up. we are outcomes driven in any way. Because of our speed and how often we're innovating and iterating content and just product innovation on its own, we have to move in and out of market very fast. So we look at some pretty standard metrics, obviously, but from a business perspective, we look at point of sale. That is our understanding of, do consumers care enough to convert? Because at the end of the day, if we think about consumer behavior, I was on a panel earlier and they were talking about a funnel. Like, there is no funnel. There's omni-channel presence. There's ecosystems like TikTok that's now just driving straight to TikTok Shop. There's a lot of impulse, especially around our products of buying. So you don't need all of the rich education. So we have to think about how consumers are behaving so we can show up in all of those ecosystems. But our goal is to convert as quick as possible and turn them into fans where they're creating their own content. So it's a very different model for us. And while we're not big long-term brand builders, we know the products and the value of our products are what are inherently building our brand for us. So the more we can get them into consumers' hands, the better it is for our overall business.
Dan?
So for me, I actually grew up professionally in more like the tech side of ad tech. So I was at Trade Desk before I came over to KDP. Before then, I was at a startup called Datalogics that was bought by Oracle. But so much of what I had done had been about closing the loop between digital advertising and in-store sales for CPG or for auto manufacturers. So like I very much am biased toward like, you know, sales lift measurement. I know that you need to do more than just paid advertising. The culture is really important. But in terms of like holding accountable my team, I felt a little bit nervous when I came here about investing too much into creator, too much into, you know, organic social, because you can't close the loop as easily. We talk a lot about, though, and I believe this full-heartedly, we talked a lot about the, you know, this concept of people are talking about your brands, they're more likely to eventually buy your brands. But from a marketing perspective, it's a little ivory tower-ish, right? Like our CFO kind of rolled their eyes a little bit like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But, you know, I love this sales lift measurement you've brought to KDP. I don't know about this other shit that you're talking about. So what we really did is like, we really focused on proving this to him. So we did a lot of research to show ultimately that the people who do talk about our brands have a higher long-term value than people who don't talk about our brands. And so we showcased to them that, hey, like, you know, I know you love the closed loop measurement. I do too. I grew up with that. But we've been able to like go from academia to actually showcasing the value of raving fans. And now we've incorporated into like our executive dashboards sales lift studies as well as upper funnel sort of brand metrics, right? Whether they're, you know, how often people talk about our brand, sort of brand attention score increases. And now like our CFO cares about those upper funnel metrics just as much as they do the lower funnel. But it was about proving it out to them and actually doing the research and getting out of sort of like ivory towers, you know, like philosophical discussions and into actual real like business outcomes.
So, Kristin, these guys all have point of sale they can look at the next morning, right?
Yes.
You don't. How do you a long consideration cycle? How do you look at metrics? What do you focus on?
It's a great question, and it's very different. I joked with Dave here that, you know, I have performance in my title, but I also have brand, and we spend nowhere near what SharkNinja does. It's a very different business model, but we are looking at long-term brand equity. So for MassMutual, because the sale is through an intermediary or some advisor that you might be working with, what the role of the brand for us is about, it's making the sale easier. So when the advisor puts a product that we manufacture in front of a end investor, the easy yes is what we're looking for. There's no explanation needed. And so we look at brand health, but we also track performance. And for us, the bottom of our performance funnel is someone who's become a consumer hand raiser who says, I'd like to work with a financial advisor on a plan. And we drive tens and tens of thousands of them a year. So we've been able to show, as the brand awareness and consideration has grown, so has our lead volume that we've passed off to advisors, and then the cost per lead has come down. So we don't look at, we're not looking at the numbers every day, like my friends here. We are looking at them consistently and seeing the correlation between brand and performance.
So in the last couple minutes, I want to talk about the existential threat that might exist. I'm going to throw a little AI into the discussion. There are synthetic creators. There are influencers who exist who don't exist. They're not real people. They're doing brand deals in the apparel space and the luxury space. They're being followed on all the platforms. Does that threaten kind of the way that you've thought about creating these moments and attaching yourselves to real, authentic people or moments? And how are you thinking about where you need to take your strategy as these synthetic moments and these synthetic influencers scale, if they do? You may not think that they're going to.
I think it's a fad, personally. I think that if you think about where we all are with AI creative in our lives, nobody looks at AI creative and says that's better than what people create right now. Maybe in the future it is. Maybe we don't have a distinguishable understanding of what is what. But right now, I think that, and particularly in the future, people are going to crave, like, Dave said, or Ben said, sorry, authentic experiences. And the reason why we all love creators as partners is that they bring a level of authenticity to what they do that brands themselves need to kind of borrow, remix, whatever you want to say. I don't at all see this idea of us working with scaled synthetic influencers as a thing. And as fashion brands, we need to be seen as authentic. We need to be seen as creative, and we need to be seen as differentiated from all of what's out there. And I don't think that the race to the bottom of fake influencers is the thing that's going to allow us to do those things.
Anyone else on?
I mean, I look at it in a few different ways. If I go back to the consumer behavior, if consumers are interested in these synthetic AI creators and influencers, that's really who I want to connect with, right? So if they see value in this influencer, whether it's human or not, that's okay. How they talk about the brand might be a different story, because we give products to influencers to ask them if they want to participate in our program. We don't force it on anyone. So when it comes to that piece, perhaps there's a bigger risk on that authenticity. But if there's a huge reach opportunity because they follow this one synthetic influencer, there's probably an opportunity to talk to them, and the insights and the performance will show if it works or not.
Ben?
Nothing really to add, right? I mean, to me, it's about listening to how people are responding to certain creators, certain influencers. And for whatever reason, somebody connects, or big groups of people connect to a synthetic creator, like, you would work with them, right? It's more about just listening to your audience, right? Like, to me, that's the key. No matter if it's like real people, not real people, it's about understanding what moves your fans. How do you engage with your fans in a way that's authentic to them, and not making judgments around what would be authentic to you. And I think that's a mistake that people kind of quickly run into when making these determinations.
But wait, hold on. I want to be contrarian here. So do you think that a synthetic influencer would have had the engagement or influence to do a Dr. Pepper campaign the way that you saw on TikTok?
Personally, I don't. But if I find that our fans, for whatever reason, whether it's irony, whether it's some humor that the people are providing, like, we'd be open to it. Like, again, like, my personal bias is, like, I can't imagine myself, like, being compelled by a synthetic creator, but, like, I'm not the audience necessarily that we're trying to reach. Like, I think it's more just listening to what culture is telling me, and then building the processes to react quickly. So, like, again, I'm not saying that, like, all the content that I consume is AI driven, and I'm excited for the day that, there's more like AI slop in our movie theaters. But, like, if that's what consumers are, like, finding appealing, like, we would be open to reacting. Does that make sense?
Sure.
All right, with 8 seconds left, we're going to land this plane right on time. It sounds to me like you got to know your audience. You got to know how to activate them. And the world of kind of top-down planning and top-down solutions is over. To effectively engage at scale, you've got to customize, you've got to have data, you've got to have specific KPIs that relate to your brand, and you've got to build a plan. All right, great. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.